I get chills when I think of 300 universities using a product that I built from scratch.
Right?
That
Yeah.
is amazing to me. And these are not like state schools that no one's ever heard of, right? Some of these were big time universities, and that was really motivating to me.
Startups with Stu is a podcast for anyone living or wanting to live the startup life, either as a founder or a team member. Your host, Stuart Draper, was a 9-time Inc. 5000 honoree before age 40. This show dives deep into the exhilarating world of entrepreneurship with guests that are seeking advice from Stu for their startup or business owners that want to share their entrepreneurial journey. Listeners always walk away with actionable ideas of what to do to take their startup to the moon. Startup life can feel like a roller coaster ride. And with Startups with Stu, you're likely to turn your roller coaster ride into a rocket ship ride. Get ready to uncover the secrets to startup success from visionary founders and savvy investors who've transformed groundbreaking ideas into thriving ventures.
This episode is brought to you today by PodUp. PodUp.com is the leading all-in-one AI-powered podcasting software. If you've ever considered having a podcast, want to get started, go to podup.com and check it out. I produce my podcast, use a variety of tools and producers that help me get everything done that I'm doing. Podallies.com is the agency I choose. If you're interested in having a podcast, you don't want to do it yourself through podup.com, I highly recommend that you go check out podallies.com and schedule a strategy call with one of their production specialists. They will be able to help you and think through everything you need to before you get started on your journey as a podcaster. This is the first episode in a brand new season or series. I guess we'll call it a series of episodes I'm going to do with early team members from my startup, Stukent. So rather than get to hear from entrepreneurs for this little series, you're going to hear from Mike Farmer, the former Chief Technology Officer at Stukent. And then in other episodes, you'll hear from someone that helped and started with customer support, then jumped over to author relations, and then jumped over to sales, and is still there at Stukent 10 years later. That happens to be my little brother, Travis. You'll hear from the CMO, the Chief Revenue Officer, and hopefully if I twist his arm enough, I can get the CFO to join who has never committed yet. And Mike, yes, if you listen in, we know you ignored there. So Mike Farmer, it is a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk, Stukent. It was great times.
Such great times. When I look back on my career, those early days at Stukent are some of my fondest life memories, not just career memories.
We all had small families at the time. We were juggling all kinds of craziness, and it seemed to bring out the best in us.
Okay, so every day when Mike walked into our warehouse/office, he would yell, "Turbo!" When Mike introduced himself to the team, he said, "Hey, I'm Mike Farmer, and my nickname is Turbo." And we were like, "Turbo? That's your, like, people legitimately call you Turbo?" He's like, "Yeah, and I want you guys to call me Turbo." So to this day, I still call Mike Turbo, and it's so good to hear that again. Man, that brings back memories.
It's a lot of fun.
So It was kind of at first for me like, oh gosh, I don't know if I got to go to Mike and tell him, like, you can't keep yelling Turbo when you walk in the office. But then it became a part of our culture that something might get interrupted for a split second, and that's okay because it brings a new energy to the room, and it makes people chuckle in the other room, and it lightens the mood. So thank you for being such a critical part in building the fun culture at Stukent.
I just love to have fun in the office. It was something that I brought from other startups that I was a part of. I just wanted to bring that in and make everyone smile in the morning, because being in startups hard. You just get so dialed in sometimes you just need to step back and have a good time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So early days, we hire Mike Farmer. This is the backstory, okay? We had worked with engineers in Romania for the first version of the simulation that we sold. Really, really good first version technology, but they were not good to work with. It was going to be impossible financially for us to make the numbers work the way that they demanded the numbers work. I even flew to Romania. I toured Dracula's castle and Bran Castle. It was amazing to get to go and experience Castle Pelesh and be in the lush, green, incredible mountainside of Eastern Europe in Romania. But sadly, with my time that I spent with those engineers over there, they were not willing to budge at all and negotiate with us on a better way to work together for the long term. So we decided as a business, the only path forward would be for us to build our own software internally and our own proprietary stuff. They engineered in a different platform and programming language than Mike. Turbo came to us with a skill set with Ruby. And when I remember Mike, when you said, yeah, Stu, you should trust Ruby, Twitter got their start with Ruby on Rails. Like, we'll be fine as a Ruby shop. And so that's what we did. And we brought Turbo in, and he built the Mimic simulation. We originally sold at Stukent the real deal simulation we had branded, and then Turbo built V1 and probably V4, all the way through V4 of Mimic, our digital marketing simulation, right?
That's right. It was a leap. I'd been doing Ruby on Rails contracting work for several years. Coming into this, I was confident in the platform and in the language and our ability to move quickly. And so it was a little bit of a leap for you, I think, Stu. I did have to do some convincing there, but I think once we started seeing things rolling out, I never lost that confidence in the platform.
You carried about you a really cool, calming confidence that helped me sleep better at night in those early days. You mentioned that startups are hard early. What are some of the things that you remember as being really hard in our startup?
I think there are probably two things that come to mind. First, and they're actually related. So first is there being the only tech guru there. You have to be able to defend your decisions, but not to a technical person. And throughout my career, I was always defending my technical decisions to technical people. And it was really hard for me to defend my technical decisions with non-technical people. You'd think it'd be easy because they would just be like, yeah, okay, you know what you're doing, just go do it. And most of it would go over their head anyway. But I think I really wanted to make sure that you understood that I was making good technical decisions. I had to come up with ways to communicate that to you and the team. I think the second hardest thing was being on my own and trusting that I was making the right technical decisions. It was kind of lonely, actually, for the first little while because, I wanted to be confident and I wanted to exert that confidence. But there's this sense that, holy cow, I'm just winging this whole thing and I really hope it turns out. And battling that internal insecurity day in and day out without any input from anyone that says, yes, you're doing good, or no, this is a dumb decision. And we had to kind of just trust that we were making good decisions. And then when we didn't make a good decision, we had to be able to pivot quickly and recover from that. Some decisions, we made a lot of really great decisions up front, but there were a few that haunted me even years afterward. I wish I would have done differently. You just have to roll with that.
Right? Yeah, you do. You got to roll with it. And I remember now questioning you. And I think my questioning didn't come from not trusting you weren't a good engineer. It was, the concern of like, okay, this is taking a long time and we're going to get close to the wire. See, when we cut the ties with Romania, it became critical that we hit our deadline because our contract was going to expire with the team in Romania. And when that contract expired, which was at Christmas time, so between, for most higher ed institutions in the US, in between of fall and winter or fall and spring semester, however you define it, we had to be able to just turn a switch and go from that old technology to our new technology. And that was going to come down to the wire, right?
That was probably the hardest time of my entire career. And the reason was there's so much that hung in the balance. It was such a big thing. Like, we had to do a lot of communication to our existing customers to saying, hey, you're getting this whole new platform. And by the way, it's not going to have these 10 features that you love from the old platform. But we're committed to this, and it will grow and it'll get better quickly. But that was so stressful for me. I remember working from home that Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's.
Ruined your kids' Christmas and your Christmas.
Man, that was a rough year, and that was a rough time. And I just remember I set up shop in a room in our house, and I went in there like right after I woke up, and I was there till I couldn't code anymore and just go back to bed and collapse. You know, I had music pumping, and my family was just like, I don't know if he's going to come out of this as like in a cocoon or something, but yeah. That was a really stressful time.
Well, I hope that Sarah listens into this and hears for the 15th time, hopefully she's heard it, sincere gratitude for the sacrifices that she made while you, Turbo, carried the company. So when I say you carried it, I mean, we just relied so heavily on you delivering. That was do or die, no plan B. We got to get from fall semester in the old tech to spring semester in the new tech, and it has to work. At the same time that Turbo is cranking and just having like to work so hard on his own to pull the weight here with like a couple of part-time team members or team members that came and went pretty quickly, like Stukent was going and growing 100 universities, then 300 universities, just like that over the course of 2 years. So we knew that sales was working. We knew that marketing was working. And there was just this big question mark. And poor Turbo's like, I have to prove myself. And find yourself a Turbo, you guys. We will talk a little bit more about that. I want to talk about, if you're not a tech founder, finding the right technologist to work on your team with you. But before we get into that, what other things would you say were super hard during those times?
Those things were that was the challenge, the focus. I came into this startup committed to making it work. It was hard for me to step away at times. Like, I really needed to, both to preserve my own sanity and keep myself from burning out. Mm-hmm. And I just remember that there were times when I was just really, really burnt out and I needed to step away, but I put myself in a position where that was just not going to happen. And so I had to figure out how to work through that. And that was a big challenge. And I learned a lot about myself and about what I'm capable of doing and what I can do when I really apply myself and work hard. It wasn't healthy though. Like, everyone was worried, and there was a lot of stress in the office, and there was a lot of going back and forth. And is this going to work? Are we going to be able to do this? What can we cut from the scope? What can't we cut? What's got to happen? And the relationships in the office get strained too. And we're all really good friends, and I think we all just work together so well. But, you know, just being patient with ourselves during that time and being patient with each other was just so important. And thankfully, everyone on the team just have just really great character, and we kind of all bore that together. That was some tricky waters to navigate there.
the bland question is, what advice do you have for a founder that's not a tech founder working with a technologist like yourself or an engineer like yourself? But I think the way I want to word it is like, okay, if we could go back in time and you could coach me on how to better work with you, what would you do different? And I've got thick skin. You know I love you no matter what you say right here. Okay. So what advice would you give a founder that's going through this?
Now, looking back, if I were to go back, I would pull out a book that I know founders are familiar with, and it's The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. A lot of founders have read that. A lot of entrepreneurs have read that. And I would apply the principles that he talks about in that book to how to build software and how to iterate. You start small, and how to be focused on what you build in the product. And I think that would have given us more common ground to work on together. I think it's easy for engineers to, especially when they're working by themselves, to kind of just stay in their own headspace and say, just leave me alone. I got this. And I need to just go heads down and work. But it's important for an engineer to have to explain themselves sometimes and to step away. I think, Stu, you tried to do that, and both of us are very protective of our headspace, I think. And both of us are trying to be polite, but we were very stressed. And I think, we had some really candid discussions, and I think those were good for us. It was good for me to have to step away from the code and say, and be questioned so that I can say, am I on the right track? Am I doing the right things? So yeah, first I would say, I would hope that we would have iterated a little bit more, and that I would have involved you more in those decisions that I was making for the product. And as an entrepreneur, you're used to working in your own headspace because this is your baby. It's your idea. You got to share that vision. You got to share what's going on in the company that's causing this stress. You got to say, look, we have money on the line. We have customers on the line. And the engineer needs to understand that, so that they're not just like, well, I'm just working on this project, that I'm just the engineer. You got to understand all of that. That's kind of a mumbled answer, but I think there are a few things in there that hopefully are helpful.
No doubt there are. I think letting yourself live in a very trusting headspace as a founder puts your engineering team member at ease and helps them feel like they can trust you and coming to you and telling you, this is what I'm struggling with. I don't have X, Y, or Z figured out yet. I think that we had some heated discussions in there, right? Like some pretty, like, this has to work. Like, we can't wait any longer. Like those types of pressure moments, those are hard. I'm sure there were a few where you're like, man, is this even worth it? What are the things that kept you going? And founders listening, pay attention here, because you have to find a way to help keep your team going when the going gets tough. It's easy. You're the gritty one. You're the one that believes and is passionate, and it's your baby. But when the going gets tough, sometimes your team members are like, I don't know if this is worth it anymore. So what were the things for you that happened that made it so you could feel like, I got this, I'm going to keep going?
So ironically, at the time, it wasn't things that like money, my salary, stake in the company. It wasn't anything like that. For me, it was, I'm in this because I want to see this thing through. I get chills when I think of 300 universities using a product that I built from scratch.
Right.
That is amazing to me. And these are not like state schools that no one's ever heard of, right? Some of these were big time universities, and that was really motivating to me. I think also I just felt I had made a commitment to you, Stu, that I was going to do this, and I wanted to see that commitment through. I knew the financial rewards, and I knew my family was being taken care of. I knew all of that would come. I was in the fight, and those heated discussions, I didn't ever feel like they were, well, some of them were probably directed at me, but I never felt like I had to like up my game or be a better person or be a better employee. I felt like, crap, I've got to go figure this out. I've got to figure out how to make this work. I've got to figure out what shortcuts are going to be okay to take so that we can make it on time, and I've always been very committed to high quality code that I know is going to work well. But when you're under the wire like that, you just got to get the thing done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I always went back after those things and just thought, okay, I understand the stress. I want to alleviate the stress. How am I going to do that?
Find yourself a turbo, you guys. You have to find yourself a turbo, and it's not easy. But before we get into, maybe there'll be a time later in this episode where we can talk about ideas of how to find and identify the right co-founder or team member to join your startup from the tech perspective. But I want to point out a couple things that Turbo's mentioned here. Number one, he got on board with a mission and vision of what he was actually doing. He wasn't laying bricks. He was building a temple to the Lord. Like, he had that kind of a mentality. I'm not punching code. I am literally building software that's going to help students find their career path. Like, I'm educating the world here. And that was huge for me as a founder, realizing like, these people aren't here for me. They're here for a bigger picture. This is bigger than me and what I want out of this business. So, and then he never left the meetings feeling like there was an attack on him. And I'm so glad to hear that, because I'm sure there were times where I felt like I was trying to come at you. But I think at the end of the day, what I always hope founders will remember is that you're better off to confront than contend. Don't have contention around situations. Have confrontation around situations. Confront problems so they can be solved. And make sure your team member knows you are confronting the problem with them, not fighting with them over which is the best way to solve it. That will never get you anywhere.
We were not perfect at this, and there were times when contention was high. I don't know that you can avoid those situations. I hope that, if I were to be in this situation again, I would hope that I would not put myself in that situation. But having been there, we weren't perfect, but I think it's okay. Like, no, we're not perfect.
That's life.
And,
yeah.
The important thing is that when those relationships are stressed, that you come back afterward and you have some debt that you've got to pay down, and that you do that. You don't just say, man, that engineer put our company in a big hole, and now I've got to find someone else to do this for me because that engineer's not with it. No, you've got to trust that engineer. I mean, I'm sure there's probably a breaking point where you're just like, no, we've got to bring in something else. But you've got to give them a chance, and you've got to give them a chance to prove themselves. And if they come through that, you're going to be best friends for life, because you don't go through that kind of crucible and not come out stronger.
Yes, I agree. We all are better people for having been through that process of growing a startup. No doubt about it. Okay. Taking a quick break from the episode. Sorry to interrupt, but I have to take a second and thank the great team at Pod Allies that helps me produce this podcast. Startups with Stu is not an easy undertaking. It takes a lot of work and team power to get this thing done. So the team I use for my podcast, podallies.com, go check them out if you are considering a podcast. If you've thought you have a dream for a show and you want to go make it happen, go to podallies.com and book a strategy call today. I promise you won't regret it. Speaking of the show or shows, let's get back to Startups with Stu in this episode. Forgive my interruption, but if you're interested, go check out podallies.com. You mentioned earlier that you touched the lives of 300 universities. Nah, man, your technology has touched the lives of Stukent is now celebrating a decade of life, and supporting its millionth student. So what you've done is just that impactful. It's huge.
I just want to mention one thing that I think was also extremely motivating to me was seeing the sales, was seeing that we were growing. Like, this business model, it worked. I mean, we kind of knew going in, like when you explained it to me, Stu, I was like, that's a business model that's going to work. Right. But that was faith at that point. Right.
Right.
But when we were really grinding on this thing, seeing those sales coming in day after day, that was like, I don't just have a responsibility to Stu. I have a responsibility to these people that are using the platform. That was really motivating as well.
Super motivating for me. So to give founders some ideas, things they might apply here from what we did to celebrate the sales and show the sales, we created a logo wall where every time we sign up a new university, we put up their mascot or their university logo on the wall. We had a Slack channel where we would celebrate every new deal that came through, and we put that on the main announcements channel. You guys, sales is literally the heartbeat of your business. If it's not happening, if the sales aren't coming, the longer you go between beats, the scarier it is. But the faster the beats start happening, the more exciting it is. And you need to celebrate the wins. Every business has ups and downs. In fact, for every up, there's a down. That's what a chart looks like. They go up and down. It's not perfect. But what you wanted to focus on is celebrating every high. So it feels like there aren't lows around here. We just have highs. And there are lows. But if you've celebrated the highs well, then when you have to confront a problem, all of a sudden it's not so difficult to solve. And it doesn't hurt so bad when people attack your idea or don't agree with you on something, because you're in this together and you're celebrating the wins along the way. Highly effective part of growing a startup. So, one of the benefits of being an early team member is being able to negotiate from time to time on stock options. Mike Farmer got to be a part of that and enjoy some of that. So Turbo, tell us, when you finally had your payday, was that like I knew this was coming kind of moment, a surprise? What did you do with the money? Tell us all about that.
A couple of things. I had been in a few startups I mentioned before, none that reached the success that we had it. I could probably wallpaper a wall with all of the promised stock options I've had throughout my career that never resulted in a single penny. And when the engine was really running, it was evident to me that this was going to pay off. We were going to do this. So receiving that, finally that payday, that was a big day. And I remember it very well. I remember you calling us together that morning and saying a few things to us as a team. I remember you being very emotional because you felt like it was part of your stewardship to make that day happen for all of us. And I remember being just really high sense of gratitude to have been a part of that. I also remember being a little angry at myself. And I hope you don't mind this. This is going to be a little honest.
Do it. Be honest. Tell us the truth.
So I was a little angry that I didn't understand the stock option process better. As an engineer, I don't understand the financial side of the company other than like a P&L. And that sales means more money for everybody, right? I didn't understand stock options that much. You had written up. I felt that the stock options you granted were very generous. But I'll be honest, I was a little angry that I didn't go back and fight for a little bit more. We were in a position in the early days where we had no idea where this thing was going to go. So I was like, Oh, you're giving me stock options. Great. Walk away. That was pretty much it.
Yeah. Like you already had the experience of it meaning nothing.
Right. It meant nothing. Right. So I wasn't angry at what I had been granted. Let me make that clear.
Yeah.
I
No,
wasn't
I get
angry
you.
at that. I was angry that I didn't understand what I was actually getting. I just knew, oh, I just got a whole bunch of cash, and that's awesome, right? One thing that I will say, if I could express something that I think would have helped me be a little bit more at ease about the whole
Mhm.
stock options thing. It's hard as a founder, as an entrepreneur, for you to be transparent about ownership in the company. There's a lot at stake. There's, you don't want to have infighting with your founding team. You don't want to be going back and forth. You don't want that to be an issue that you have to deal with when you start a company.
For sure. Yeah.
So it would have been nice if I had a little bit more transparency of not necessarily how my cut compares to my other teammates' cut, but just
Mhm.
like I had no idea what percent of the company I was actually getting. All I had was this number of shares. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, that's going to translate into something later. Great. If we sell it a certain valuation or whatever, that's going to mean something great for my family. And I appreciated that. But it was impossible for me to negotiate that because I had no point of reference of
Yeah.
what it was. Like, I didn't know if I was getting 50. No, I knew I wasn't getting 50%, but I didn't know if I was getting 2% or 10% or 0.5%. And so I just didn't know what I was getting. That's the part that I'm kind of kicking myself over, is I wish I understood that better. Just so that I could have been more intelligent about conversations around that.
I think it's really good advice and lesson learned here that Turbo's sharing around how important it is to, if you are given stock options, don't just take them without taking them to an attorney or an accountant that can help you understand what it all actually means. And for founders, you have to be very careful about how you go about these conversations, because one, it can mean nothing someday. And I think it's important for founders to explain and be fair to your team member, like, hey, if this thing doesn't work out, these won't be worth anything. In fact, if the business doesn't grow to $4 million, then if it sells for less than that, you're not going to get anything, because it's all going to go to the preferred shareholders that already put money into the business. It's important to help your team understand that. What I focused hardest on was ensuring that whatever value they were given in a dollar amount, that they could know that's going to go bigger. And so when you give shares, at a minimum, I would say, if you tell them that they're getting $50,000 worth of shares, then you need to also say, and today that's what they're worth, because we believe the business is worth $2 million. Okay, let's say $2 million business. I own $50,000 worth of shares. Therefore, I own whatever percent that is. And then don't make me do hard math. And actually, it's probably easy math, but I'm going to keep going here. But my point is, they can get a feel for it. And then they can know, okay, so if we get the business to where it's worth $4 million, I will have $100,000. And if we get the business to where it's worth $8 million, I will have, now it's gone 8 times. So 50 times 8, it's worth $400,000. I remember a conversation where early days stock options were granted, and Turbo said something back to me like, I just would love it if I got a check that allowed me to pay off my house someday. And so I don't know if we got you just there, if it was big enough for that, or if that was the wisest way to go and use your money. But I always did take it really serious that for everyone that put in money or put in the amount of blood, sweat, and tears like Turbo did, that there was a payday in store.
Like I said, I'm truly just grateful for that. And you asked earlier what we did with that money, and we got that payout end of 2019, if I remember.
Yeah.
And I never had that much money before. I just didn't know what to do with it.
Right. Yeah.
And I went to a financial advisor. I'm like, I just got this big check and I have no idea. It's just sitting in my savings account right now. I've no idea what to do with this. And he's like, what all financial advisors do? Well, put it in the market, and invest it over time. So that's what I did. And then 2020 hit, And I just watched the value of that just take made me sick. But I didn't panic and I left it in, and now it's growing again. But man, that was stressful.
Oh yeah.
I did
All of
take,
a sudden there's new stresses when you have money versus when you don't, right? The
yeah,
stress is to have the money, the stress is to then not lose it when you have it.
I did take a little bit and just, celebrate. I took my family on a vacation. It's still the best vacation we've ever had. I always wanted a really nice home theater system, so we did that. And every time I go down and I watch a show or something and I hear that thing and the house is shaking, I just have been like, it just brings a lot of satisfaction, And I'm not saying I put all that gratitude into the material gain there. It's just a reminder of that time and that effort and those people and those customers. And we talked about this like 1 month gap where there was just a lot of intense stress. And like the rest of the time didn't even come close to that. Like, the rest of the time there were still stresses and ebbs and flows, but we had a great time. We did so many things right when we were winging it that just left to chance. We could have just completely blown it, but we didn't. And it was successful and it was fun. When I think of having fun watching a movie, I think of having fun being a part of early days Stukent. It was a lot of fun.
That's cool. Yeah, you got to have fun along the ride. It is a roller coaster in startup land. And if you want to take it to the moon, make sure you're finding a way to have fun. So let's switch gears for a second. I want to cover one more thing and we'll probably wrap up after this. How do you find the right engineer if you're not a tech founder? I brought that up earlier, and I'm so eternally grateful to have found you, Turbo. So let's talk our story, how we found each other, and then maybe we can share some ideas for other ways to be in touch with potential founding partners.
I don't know if you remember, Stu, we went to Silicon Slopes conference one time as a team, and there was this guy walking around with this big sign on him and balloons coming off that said, "Tech engineer looking for a CEO," or something like that to start a new startup. That's not how you do it. I think there's some qualities that you should look for. I think they should have experience in a startup before, whether it's, as an individual contributor or manager, doesn't really matter, but they need to understand that this is not going to be an 8 to 5 venture, 5 days a week, especially at first. Building a startup is way hard work. It's going to stress you in ways that you're not going to, unless you're like a serial entrepreneur, you're not going to put yourself in those kind of positions very often in your career. So they need to understand that that's going to be the expectation. One other thing I think that's important is that they're not just engineers, but they do have some business savvy, that they understand what those sales numbers actually mean, that they understand that revenue doesn't translate directly to your salary, right? Revenue has to run the whole company. It has to, and not only that, but it has to be there to propel the company forward. You have to be able to spin a flywheel, and that's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of revenue to do that. So you can't have someone that's just greedy for a paycheck. They've got to be committed to the vision. I think something that really helps your engineer engage is the vision. It's also knowing that the business plan is solid and that it's going to work. I remember when we first went golfing and you were telling me about Stukent and what we were going to do, I was so convinced that this thing was going to work. Like, the business plan was so sound. I'd had experience in ed tech before. I knew there were ways to make money there because it's just a huge industry. But our plan to go directly to the student for our money was brilliant. It was the thing that I think really helped us be successful. And I knew that day one. Your engineers got to understand those types of things. They've got to understand what makes a business run. They can't just be a brilliant engineer. You'll fight them every day because they'll be in it to build their project, and that's it. And if that's the engineer you have, then you'll end up with this really great piece of software that doesn't solve any of the business problems, doesn't make money. And the engineer won't care because they'll be like, hey, I built this beautiful piece of software and, whatever.
Yeah, they care deeply about what they want to build, and sometimes what they want to build isn't in line with what the business actually needs. You have to be careful about that. I like that you pointed out that we went golfing. I think it's wise to spend time with people beyond just a typical interview or a networking event and deciding to work together. Turbo and I had gone to lunch other times and had other networking events years prior. I'm talking 4 or 5 years prior, where Turbo was putting on events for engineers and other online marketing industry people could get together. And I participated in those. And I was always impressed by Mike, how he was so easy to talk to and interact with, but yet also so savvy in the engineering side of his work. That is a rare breed. I also think early stage, it's good to find tech leader, engineer, VP of engineering. I think it's a good first title versus CTO. That someone that actually knows how to do front end decent, back end really well, so that they can be, and it's kind of a unicorn. It's hard to find someone that's really good at both the front end and the back end of your software that you're building.
I think
finding that's so critical, right?
Yeah, another thing that I think is important that we did a good job on. I don't know that we did like an amazing job, but we did it just well enough. And that is hiring. You have to know like what kind of budget you're working with. You have to know what kind of talent is going to be available at that budget. And then you have to know how to pick out the shining stars, because you're not going to go out and hire senior developers. You're going to have to hire a lot of junior developers, and you're going to have to mentor those developers and ensure that they are able to contribute in a meaningful way. We did a pretty good job of that, I think. We weren't always successful. We had some junior developers that ran us down roads that cost us a little bit. Having someone that is not just an engineer, but also a mentor and can hire, that knows that process. Even if they have a little bit of a network, we're fortunate to be next to a university. It was just loaded with engineers that needed, our young junior developers that needed internships. That worked out really well for us on the early days, but it wouldn't have worked out if I hadn't put as much effort into their development as the development of the product as well.
Yeah, wow. When you shared that just now, a flood of memories of different team members came to mind, people that were real contributors to Stukent, some of which I'm just like so sad to say they didn't stick around for the big upside that could have been theirs later on. So thank you for being around for the upside and for all you did for Stukent, for being with me here today, Turbo. Any last words of advice for founders, entrepreneurs?
In my time at Stukent, where I questioned whether or not you should really be good friends with the people that you work with. I mean, because when things kind of go bad, it makes it hard for you to stand up and tell them the things that you need to tell them. I've reversed thought on that as I reflect back. I think you need to be the best friends that you can be. And the reason for that is because it allows you to have candid conversations with love. It allows you to not feel attacked personally when you've got to have hard conversations. Those conversations are rarely about productivity. They're almost always about what choices are we making? How do we need to course correct? And I think the engineer in your company is always going to be a little weird, right? The sales guys, the CEO, the marketing guys, they're all going to get along. They have a lot of common interests, but the engineer is going to be weird because he's a nerd and he doesn't get your jokes. He doesn't necessarily do he may be a little introverted where you're like the ones that are outgoing. Just be patient with him. Make sure he's included. Stu always did a good job making sure I was included, even though it was awkward at times. And that
reminds me of a fun snowmobile trip, Turbo.
Absolutely. I fell off the snowmobile a lot on that trip. And
Oh, that was fun.
I was able to have a good time. That was a good memory. But yeah, you got to just be patient with them, accept them for who they are, but still keep involving them. And I think you'll be friends forever after that. And you may not like buddy with them lunch all the time or something, but you'll always be friends. You'll always have that relationship that you can go back to.
Absolutely. I think you have to live your life in such a way at work. Like, people talk about don't do business with family. And for the most part, I think that's wise advice for most people and their level of relational maturity. But I think I strive to be like my Savior, Jesus Christ. When I compare myself to people, I try not to. And I try to say, am I being like my Savior would want me to be? And so that means that when I'm working, I'm trying to be like Jesus. And that doesn't always mean that I won't get frustrated with someone. It just means that if I'm going to be frustrated with them, I'm going to show them that I still love them for who they are as a human being. And now, man, it almost brings me to tears, Turbo, hearing you say some of the things you've said today, because I just have such a deep love and admiration, like your brother, for me. And that'll never go away. By the way, it didn't always work out perfect with Turbo. Turbo didn't stay at Stukent forever. There was a time when he said, hey, it's my time to walk away. And we got someone new on board. Turbo still came back to Stukent later. And it was because we had built a relationship where just because he left didn't mean he was dead to us. He was still our brother. And so go and build and take your startup to the moon. Get the right engineer to help you do it if you're in the software world. Find yourself a Turbo is my message for today. Mike, thank you so much for being with me on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay. Take care, buddy. Hey, founders, entrepreneurs, investors, and other listeners of Startups with Stu. Thank you for listening to this episode today. As I mentioned at the beginning, as I mentioned in the middle, I want to take a second again at the end and say, if you haven't yet and you're considering a podcast, go check out podallies.com. They sure help me a lot with the show. And I am so grateful for all that they do to help me accomplish Startups with Stu and get it out to the world so we can help more founders and take your startup to the moon. Go check out podallies.com and podup.com if you're interested in podcasting at any level.
Thanks for joining me on Startups with Stu. We have big goals to help millions of entrepreneurs. If you enjoyed this show, please take a minute to share it with someone else that needs to hear it, or leave a review. Remember, success is within reach for those who dare to dream big and take action. Until next time, keep pushing forward on your entrepreneurial journey.